Good evening, and a very warm welcome to another of our events as Caregiver Sathi celebrates 3 years of putting our intention, our love, and our desire out to the world that family caregivers and caregivers need the light, need to be seen, and we need to be able to see what they are contributing to us, not just in our family spaces, but as a society overall. Caregiver Sathi is our attempt to build a world that recognizes family caregivers and that we can have an ecosystem that supports family caregivers. A big place where family caregivers deserve to be seen and care deserves to be recognized is workplaces. And workplaces hitherto have been spaces where people bring in their professional capacities, people bring in their ability to perform and deliver results. On many an occasion, I have heard that workplaces are cut and dry places of performance. It is my absolute pleasure to initiate a conversation with someone I have truly admired and looked up to. I think is a thought leader in many ways. And to speak about the topic that we are going to engage with today, Abhijit Bhaduri, the founder and CEO of Abhijit Bhaduri and Associates. Welcome, Abhijit.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for having me. When you said all this generous stuff, I thought I was in the wrong room. So,
Certainly not. Somebody that I have known personally for many years, but also admired, and probably not let you know enough about my admiration. But I have known how you have led organizations, and I have wanted to learn from you. Followed you. And I do think that what is absolutely wonderful is the fact that one can open a conversation about a new idea and grapple with it as we make meaning for it. So I do think that we are at a point where we do need to think about workplaces and how they are transforming. What might a workplace of the future look like? But in those elements, in addition to all the other dimensions that we consider, talk about compassionate workplaces. I'm going to start by asking you, what does a compassionate workplace, this phrase per se, mean for you? And what would you, let's start with that.
thanks, Bhavna. I think when you invited me to talk about, this whole aspect of caregiving, one of the things that I was thinking of is in my book, Dreamers and Unicorns, I talk about five forces. I'll not talk about all five, but one of the things I talk about is the rise of emotions in the workplace. As a shift that will happen. These are the five shifts that organizations are going to experience, and we are seeing all of them today. So the work that you are talking about in terms of compassionate workplaces actually falls in that whole category, which is we are going to see workplaces which are far more comfortable with emotion. Though we have demanded emotional resilience from employees. We have demanded things like passion. We say that we want people to be creative. All of these are emotions that they have a deep sense of belonging to the organization, or they have a great bonding with their colleagues, etc. These are emotions, but at the same time, there has historically been a kind of a myth in some sense that workplaces are all about task and not emotion. That's so not true, except for the fact that we've demanded emotions of convenience. So when the employer wants you to be passionate about the project or the work or the organization, then emotion is okay. But if you say, um, I have commitments at home which are really weighing on my mind, that's not been okay. So it's been a one-sided thing in many ways, and it has always been very, it's been emotions of convenience. What we are going to see in a compassionate workplaces, there is a psychological safety which allows you to bring in your full self, experience the emotions of the others around you, and share your own emotions, in as much as you share your knowledge, skills, attitude, etc., all of that. So, in a true capacity, that's happening. And the last piece I would say is the reason why it was the shift has happened is because as we've moved workplaces into homes, there is no place to leave the emotion behind. Therefore,
Mm,
when work moved in, because of Corona, so many people started to, work out of their home. This was the natural place where we have been very comfortable being open with our emotions of, good or bad. I mean, we felt comfortable expressing a vulnerability or the psychological safety or, all of that. And that today, has permeated into the workplace. Hence, this whole notion of the compassionate workplace. Very long answer.
and well articulated. I absolutely think that it is important for us to recognize that it is not that emotions were not present. It's just that we chose the ones for convenience. I absolutely am going to reuse your phrase and say how we recognize certain emotions. We want the passion, but we want the passion in a certain way. We want the the person to commit to the organization or have that sense of belonging, but there will be that belonging for other things as well. And like, what do we do with that? So I really like how you have articulated this. I was reading an article 2015, before the current pandemic, and in HBR, that referenced compassionate leaders as, can you afford to be compassionate or tough? And I was intrigued by presenting this as opposites. And
Mm.
in your experience, do you think that compassionate workplaces are not results oriented? Or do you think that if you are a compassionate and a caring workplace or a leader, how does that impact business results or being result oriented?
That's a great question. I wrote a piece a couple of years back, which is called The Rise of the Relationship Worker.
Uh huh.
We've heard of the knowledge worker, that's not a new phrase. But
Mm,
I talked about the rise of the relationship worker. And the reason why that's an important thing to look at is because progressively, the way work gets done
mm,
um, is not just through knowledge, but you may have the knowledge,
yeah.
but it's really the relationships that let people go above and beyond. So let me give you an
Mm,
example. When you now technically, if you have given me a letter of appointment, we have agreed on the money that I will receive, and all of that, that transactional bit has been settled, you shouldn't have to incentivize me to do the work or feel motivated in a certain way, etc., but you do. That's because human beings are sentient beings. They have emotions, and therefore the ability of the workplace, the what segregated the leaders from the people who were merely dishing out the orders is the ability to build that relationship, understand, where am I experiencing that difficulty, to slow down, coach, guide, all of that. These are all things that are enabled on the platform of emotions. Yeah. So the people who are truly results oriented are not the people who hand out the task to be done through an email, but these are people who actually work with you and make sure you not only do what has been asked of you, but you can go above and beyond. You fulfill your own potential. You experience a sense of flow because your skills are all leveraged in a perfect way. So in many ways, the really, if you want to segregate the true leaders in the organizations who are truly performance oriented, these are all people who build deep relationships. Um, sometime back, this gentleman called Sidney Finkelstein wrote a book called Super Bosses. Yeah, well, I've loved the book. It talks about the fact that in every industry, if you really trace back, you will find a few people who have been, common bosses that all the superstars of that,
Mm.
function
Generally.
or that industry have. They've
Yeah.
either worked with that person in the same organization, or they worked with that individual across different organizations, and everywhere the person has gone, built a legion of fantastic people. And these are all people who have not only coached and guided and nurtured talent, but also helped people to stay connected. So these are people who are truly the relationship workers. So that's the uh, definition of a very productive person.
So, relationship workers is the foundation for a compassionate leader, and compassionate leaders cannot thrive unless there is an environment that is a compassionate workplace, I suppose.
Absolutely, absolutely so.
So, you have led very large organizations and you have nurtured and built, and there is certainly a business or a result orientation. But what do you think are the ingredients of a compassionate workplace and how do you build one?
So I think when you start working with human beings, I think the very first piece that you are really looking at is the ability to build trust.
Mm,
Because that's the first foundational piece in any relationship, and that relationship can be even between, let's say, an organization and an individual. So you trust the products of a certain organization, you trust a particular product of a certain country,
mm,
you trust a certain individual, you trust a political party, you trust a doctor. So trust is a very fundamental basis of any equation between two people, wherever that might be. The second piece that, as a byproduct of that trust is the ability to, when you have trust, you create an environment of psychological safety where I can really truly tell you that, this is something that I can do, and this is something I can do with a little bit of guidance, and this is something I'll struggle with.
mm,
And that actually, the reason why it works well is if the manager who's managing a team of people is able to build that psychological safety and knows from day one, you're prepared that this is a place where the person is not going to be able to do it. You either figure out a way to, match that gap, or, either coach the person or teach the person or have somebody else do it or whatever. So you are a high performing leader because there is psychological safety where I can tell you that, look, this I can do really in a heartbeat. You don't need to give me 5 days. I can do it in three.
mm,
This, you're giving me 5 days, but I'll probably still not be able to do it even if you gave me 10. So, you are better off when the people are able to do that. Two, also in terms of goal setting, etc., if you really start looking at it, which is an art, I believe that goal setting is a very underappreciated art, because how do you set goals within the frame of an organization where you can understand how much the person can do? So the people who are truly compassionate are able to bring that ability at one level, understand the limitation. Two, understand where there is a little bit of hesitation, a little bit of coaching, the person will be able to go past that barrier. So this is a human skill. So I think working with people is altogether, the acid test of every human skill that we have. So compassionate workplaces are really all around that psychological safety, the trust, and being able to therefore be super productive or very, very strong performance focus. I
mm,
think it's a myth to think that if you're performance focused, you are not focused on the individual. That's absolutely not true.
mm, mm. I agree with you. I like that combination of the emphasis on building trust, and I suppose it goes both ways. I was just trying to look back at the managers I have trusted more versus also the managers who have trusted me more. I don't know where at which point that trust starts. Should the individual need to trust their manager and be more vulnerable, or should the manager create something? How do you think that trust works between an individual and a manager?
In any scenario between people, power is look, in an ideal situation, the power equation is equally balanced. Yeah,
Mm,
but in a work setting, it's rarely in that zone. So
yeah,
in a reporting relationship, very clearly, the manager has more power than the
that's right.
individual employee. If that is the case, whoever has more power actually needs to take the first step forward to
Mm,
be vulnerable, and therefore that builds the trust for the other person to open up and sort of share that. So I
mm,
think that's how I would define it in any setting. So if it's the in a parent-child kind of a relationship, I would imagine that if the parents are more vulnerable at some stage, it encourages the kid to be truthful and open up and sort of trust the parent that much more. So I think it's always the person who's more powerful who takes the first step.
I am so glad you brought in the dynamic of the power play that is at play, and the dynamic. So the interesting thing of trust, power, and vulnerability, and how much of that onus rests on the manager or the leader, as
True.
opposed to expect that of the team member. The first step to be taken by the leader, and how might one open up to that. Now, it leads me to think about all the people that I've had, and interestingly, one has had both men and women managers, and I have found that there is a certain pressure and expectation of women leaders, and it's a little harder for them to be vulnerable at the workplace. And
Mhm.
there is, because you have to constantly prove that you're as strong and as whatever as men. And I think that it's a little easier for men to be vulnerable, and in fact they're quite lauded for it. uh, what is your experience about men and women and masculinity and femininity at the workplace, and how does that play out for compassionate workplaces?
It's I would sort of say, Bhavna, that it's a bit of a nuanced thing. I would, deconstruct it in a couple of different ways.
Hmm.
So one of the threads I would pull out on this is that just as much as we talked about the power equation in the previous conversation, it is the same thing when it comes to majority versus minority. In the
Hmm.
workplace, traditionally, in most workplaces, if the majority of the people are men, then it is for them to display the vulnerability. So that's the first part of it. I would sort of talk about that. The second piece that I would sort of look at is that also traditionally, regardless of men or women, I mean, workplaces have generally focused on task more than relationships,
Yes.
and therefore, that's been celebrated. So you kind of have seen, um, even in popular fiction or movies, you see this whole notion of um, the stereotypes just get reinforced that you are looking at a person who is brutal and who sort of crushes you. There are, of course, equal number of representations of horrible women bosses. I mean, The Devil Wears Prada is one such example. Except for the fact that I always thought it was a bit of a caricature-ish depiction of
Yeah.
leadership roles. I think when it comes to looking at relationships in the workplace, um, or relationships with the manager, relationships with your coach, etc. I don't think popular cinema has done a great job, and I don't think that um, it's been depicted in the right way.
Mm.
So, re- to your question, it's not a gender thing, but it's initially it has always been that you leave your emotions outside, and therefore whether men or women, they've all been told to focus on the task, not
Mm.
the relationship. That's the
Mm.
first part of it. Two,
Mm.
if the men have been in majority, they have to make the first move. As I said, that's the power thing, which comes from numbers,
Mm.
therefore that. Three, if there are scenarios where women are leading the organization, and there are plenty of examples where I can think of, um, if they make a conscious effort um, to not deny the femininity, then I think it becomes easier for the rest of the people to follow. Conversely, when the men are in that position, of being the CEO or whatever is the senior most role in that unit, um, as they become comfortable sharing emotions or talking about that in that language, it becomes easier for the other people, even in the majority, to follow suit. So I think it's therefore there are multiple strands in that question, and so I would just deconstruct it in these three buckets.
No, fair enough. I do think that increasingly we need to have more and more leaders and OD practitioners or even HR managers constantly create education and understanding of the dynamic of masculine and feminine leadership, perhaps.
Hmm.
Um, I, mm, I was just looking back at as you were speaking, it was triggering a lot of memories of some of the managers that I've had, and I was wondering whether it's a men thing or a women thing. I think we have so few examples of women leaders that it's not a fair comparison. Also, hopefully that with time now there will be many more women leaders, and we will be able to see a lot of variety in women leaders as well. I do think it's a huge burden to carry to say that because you're a woman leader, you will be more kind and empathetic and compassionate.
That I think is the prison of stereotypes that we have. That if a mother sacrifices her share of the meal and gives it to the child, I mean it's sort of looked at as ha wo to hona hi hai, because she's the mother. It's expected that she's going to do that. So in some sense, this is also thrust upon women. So there, in as much as you say that. Some people are born great and others have greatness thrust onto them. I
Yes.
think compassion, some people are compassionate regardless of gender, and
Yeah.
others have compassion thrust onto them. And usually
Yes.
the women, women are in that zone where they are forced to be seen to be compassionate, etc. Um, and society treats them very harshly if they are otherwise. So any deviation from that is not easy.
Yes. I mean, I can safely speak on behalf of all my team members that I'm not as compassionate as they would expect me to be.
That's
So,
what they were telling me.
yes, I know
Uh,
the cat is out of the bag. Uh, Well, I would also like to bring in, given your experience of having worked with various HR teams and HR leaders, I think there is also sometimes an unfair, not just men and women divide, but also functional divide. For
mhm.
example, I have heard on many occasions that if you want emotional replenishment, if you want, a kind, safe
Go to
space,
HR.
go to
Oh God,
you completed my sentence. So go to
this
HR.
is such a stereotype. I mean,
Right.
so yeah, I think one of the things that happens is, which is really seriously weird. One of the things is that it, in some sense, what it does, the drama that's getting played out there is that you're sort of uh, taking away the responsibility of everybody else to display the emotional part of it, and therefore that burden becomes disproportionately on one function. In as much as it's really like saying the rest of us can flout the norms, but it is for finance to build in financial discipline.
Yeah.
They can't. I mean,
Yeah.
if everybody doesn't do it, they can't do it.
That's
It's the same thing with emotional sort of, the display of emotions or building a compassionate workplace, etc. It can't be left to one particular function, and
it.
this is also at the same time we want HR to be talking about, can you be business focused, to have a seat at the table, we need to have you focused on the business, so you have to speak that language. At the same time, you kind of say that but all caregiving will have to be there. And somewhere every society historically, caregiving has had not even a second class. It's in a three-tier system. It's probably the third tier.
Yeah.
And therefore, whoever provides care has
Yeah.
always been given an inferior status in a societal hierarchy.
Yeah.
So, in an organizational context, if HR is expected to sort of do that, and all or the support functions. I mean, for example, admin,
Admin.
is providing, to make sure that this is working, this is done.
Mm, mm,
Um,
mm.
IT services is looked at
Yeah.
as, my laptop is not working, and they're sort of running around to do that. So these are often the services part of it is looked at as less important. It's not the
Mm,
core heart of the business. So therefore, if you look at business language, it very clearly segregates things into that hierarchy and say this is
mm,
business critical. I mean, for
mm.
example, if you say we want to open a creche, so the whole question is, but what's the business case for it?
Right.
So if you say that we need to invest in skilling up the employee, but what's the business case?
Yeah.
So I think anything historically, things which are not tangible, things that you can't compare and count, have always been put aside. And there are many organizations, many very well-known business leaders who've kind of, worn this on their shoulder as a star to say that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist, it doesn't matter.
Mm,
And it's raised a whole generation of leaders who become blind to the whole notion of intangible factors. And
mm,
emotion is an intangible factor. It can be experienced, it can be felt, but you can't sort of do it. Which is why when you think about organizations when they are looking at building, today we say it's an experience. The product is an experience for the
mm,
consumer. Or if I'm a candidate in your organization, then the candidate experience matters, or the employee
mm,
experience matters. Why do
mm,
people struggle with experience so much? Because it's hard to measure in that compare and contrast model. So
mm,
it is, therefore, we have never trained, there has been a hierarchy, and one thing which is tangible and measurable has occupied spaces one, two, and three. Now, suddenly we want, this whole thing to become number one because it's driving business. That's going to
mm.
take time.
So I don't know why this kept coming up, but like we are in the here and now, so this has come up for me now. And given that you have written a book about unicorns and dreamers, and currently the definition of a unicorn is a 1 billion valuation, I would like for you to help us reframe unicorns as not just those that have a 1 billion valuation in terms of market value, but what about workplaces, the kind of work and how the work is being done? What is
Yeah,
the piece that I'm missing here?
so, actually, if you read the book, I mean, I talk about the fact that it's not really the valuation that I really talk about as a definition of unicorn. See, dreamer is when you are starting out anything. You have a dream, you have a vision of what that stuff is going to be like, and you're trying to find product market fit. You're trying to sort of fine tune and polish up. What is your value proposition to the employees, etc. All of that. You're trying to put that into place. That's a dreamer place. And most of the times when you look at it, your impact is restricted to a particular certain kind of a geography. Maybe you are in the metros, maybe you are in one town or whatever. So it's that's
Hmm.
the dreamer phase. In the unicorn phase, you are present in at least one country, and India is a huge country. To be present in, and then potentially you are in a couple of other places, so you're just sort of putting your footprint in different geographies there, but your team is still very local. I mean, in the sense that wherever your headquarter is, where you started, is where your team is largely from. Even when you go into a country, you're sort of doing that. You're finding your feet. So the real shift that happens from dreamer to unicorn is actually when how the maturity of leadership talent and culture emerges as the business grows. Because the third phase from the unicorn is that of a market shaper. And we're saying
Hmm.
that then you are present everywhere, and you fundamentally changed the way people live and work, and that's the
Yes.
market shaper. So those are some of the definitions, and being able to, when you're talking about leadership, talent, and culture, all three of them are guided by those five forces that I talk about. That they are boundaryless, and that you understand uh, emotions in the workplace, and it's a perpetual beta, etc. All of that. That
Yes.
you are comfortable managing polarities. That it's not performance versus emotion. It's both, and each one works with the other to make it work. So those are some of the kind of things that we are constantly talking about.
That's right. So I really like the way that you have articulated what it, so what it means for an organization to transition from one phase to the other, and what does one need to constantly reflect upon in order to build the capability to be a market shaper. And I would like for us to, one of the questions that keeps coming up and comments that keeps coming up is, why is it important to, what might be some of the other things that are required? So you might have a bunch of compassionate leaders, yeah, so that we
Mhm.
have that. What
Sure.
is required in addition to having compassionate leaders such that the workplace is sustainably a caring and compassionate workplace?
So, when you are looking at asking the employee to bring their whole self to work, which is
Yes.
what we we are constantly talking about. That means, in some sense, you are not plucking the employee outside of the ecosystem in which the person is operating.
Mm,
Ergo, you are sort of acknowledging that being an employee is one particular role that the person has, but there are many other roles that the person plays. In my case, I play the role of a father, a husband, son, or whatever, son-in-law, etc. I mean, neighbor, community person, etc. There are multiple roles I'm playing. When you're saying bring your full self to work, you have to understand that you are also bringing the shadows of all the other roles into the workplace.
mm,
Um, and at the same time, the workplace is also a microcosm of what's happening in society. I mean, so,
mm,
if you talked about women leaders, I mean, it's not very hard to sort of understand why. And the reason for that is, if you don't have women in an equal, at par in a position of prominence outside in societal settings, it is going to be very hard for the organizations to sort of create those kind of positions. Though I will also add that organizations are probably in the most powerful place to drive change, because organizations can provide economic incentives, and they are very powerful for most people. Economic incentives really work fast. So, if you want to drive some kind of a change really quickly, you are talking about a partnership with the organization. And therefore, looking at that kind of a change is really what I would sort of make a beginning with.
So there's so many things that you said which were like triggers for great conversations. I'm going to pick the first one that I remember and see that I can remember the others as well. So let's talk about the multiplicity of roles that we all play and the tension of that. So I would think that a workplace that recognizes that I, as a person, am bigger than just the degrees and the professional capability that I bring to the workplace, will make it compassionate towards me, and therefore I will give my best to that place and I will stick there longest. um, in your experience, the tension of, can you give us some examples of how you may have dealt with a person dealing with, let's say, the pulls of different roles, or the pull of now versus later? Pick anyone.
One of the ways to sort of look at it is, if you just sort of look at the fundamental construct.
Hmm,
Um, I said that you bring in the shadow of different roles. Yeah.
that is another
When
one.
yeah. So
What
you're
is the
bringing in
shadow of a role? Help us understand that.
the shadows of different roles. Means that, how is a shadow created when the person
Mm,
stands in the light, and you kind of shine a light on the person. There's a
mm,
shadow which is created. Yeah, so
mm,
the shadow is of that role, and therefore in the organization there's a shadow of the role which is, for example, when I take my work back home, or
mm,
I'm sitting at the dinner table while the family is having a conversation, and I'm sort of talking to somebody from the office. The shadow of my role is sort of infringing on my role as a parent, or as husband or son, or whatever. It's sort of looking at that. Conversely, when I walk into the workplace, the shadow of all the other roles, whichever place you shine a light. So if you shine a light on me as a husband, that role, the shadow of that role, will come into the workplace with me. It's just
mm,
that you haven't switched the light on and from that direction, ergo, you're not able to see that shadow. Yeah. So
mm,
therefore, what it means is that if there is a issue that I'm grappling with, as let's say, in at home, because my spouse happens to be unwell, my partner happens to be unwell, my partner is experiencing some kind of a challenge in the workplace, etc. I It is going to take up mind space for me. Yeah.
mm,
um, so now that's obviously at the very sort of, we are taking a very simplistic model where there is one other role, but typically, in settings, in collectivist societies like we have in India, you are not only talking about one role, but you are talking about multiple roles. So there are people who will say that my neighbor is unwell. I mean, so let me give you a more concrete example, otherwise very sort of abstract. I was I was working in an organization which I should not name, but it was a place where plenty of people from multiple countries who were working here. And the situation was that, I happened to be talking with this particular gentleman who's from a different nationality who was here. The Westerner had spent about 6, 8 months in India, um, and was sort of, having a conversation with me when somebody from his team walked in. I said, I just need to sort of remind you that, I'm going to take leave from next week. So this gentleman says, for what? So he says, actually, it's my second cousin's, marriage. So the person says, what is second cousin? So he says, no, this is like my cousin brother, and it's his marriage. So he says, hold on. First of all, it's a cousin. Then it's a second cousin. And why are you going for it? So he says, no, but we've all grown up together. He's like my own family and all of that. And the person says, this is rubbish. You can't be doing this. To have the sensitivity to that relationships have multiple meanings, in different countries and cultures, is something that you may not be born with because you've not experienced that kind of a setting. Yeah. So
yeah,
for somebody in India, second cousin could be just as close. I mean,
yeah,
or you might say that, this is my grandfather had three brothers. This is the second brother's grandson or
yeah,
whatever. So it's
yeah,
a cousin twice removed.
yeah.
In many societies, that's not a very close relationship, and ours it could well be. So I
Mm,
think understanding these shadows, um,
mm,
is very important if the workplace is going to get the best out of me. Because,
mm,
and so I stepped in, and then we were just trying to understand. I said, how long are you going to be away from? So he says, actually, he wants me to, do the Kanyadan and all of that. I mean, sort
mm,
of, got into all of this. And he says, but why isn't this girl's father doing it? So he says, no, but it's a mark of respect. And I've been with the family for that times of challenge and this. There's so much of history into this
yeah,
whole conversation. If you are unable to comprehend what it means in today's context, you can't be a great leader today.
yeah.
And so I think that's the whole point. And in this particular case, I obviously, you know, it makes me seem like coming in through shining. Is just that I've been exposed to that kind of a setting, so I was able to see it. And somebody who's not been able to see this because they've not been exposed to it, I would be equally lost in some of those settings in a different culture or context. So I think that's the whole point of understanding how many shadows the person could bring into the workplace.
Absolutely. And I also hear you say that perhaps if you want to demonstrate being compassionate, you can't learn it in a classroom, but you can probably learn to be curious. So,
Yeah, because human skills are, it's harder to teach them in the classroom. I can tell you that, you must be compassionate. What does that mean in this kind of a
yes,
setting we just spoke about?
yes,
You
yes,
have to have experienced it, and you have to have experienced many varieties of this, and
yes.
begin to understand how many shadows does the person bring to the role.
Huh.
To be able to truly understand which are the ones you can ignore, which are the ones you must take into account, which are the ones you must make space for, etc. All of that. That's something that you can do only if you, truly build that in.
So, if you were to advise managers, and that's one of the questions that has come up, like if you were to say that you want your managers or team members to be able to demonstrate being a compassionate leader, what can you do? What are some of the tips that you would give managers to say that how can I demonstrate that I'm a compassionate leader?
I mean, as I said, that in any human relationship, step one is to be able to earn the trust, and you
Mm,
earn trust by two or three things. One is, again, one of the most common things that we try to do in a new setting. We can earn trust by demonstrating our expertise. So let's
mm,
say if I join a new organization, people are very eager to show that
mm,
you made the right choice. I'm a really smart person, and I demonstrate my expertise as a way of building trust.
yeah,
Actually, enough and more research actually shows that if you build your relationships first, it's a far better and far more efficient way of building trust, because
right.
if the people don't like you, there's nothing that you can do, no matter how smart you are, to be able to actually survive in that environment, because the people have to like you to be able, before they have to like you before they like your ideas and suggestions.
Yeah,
So number of times one has seen that this going wrong, because people are really very keen to demonstrate how everything that you've done in the past is silly and wrong, and I'm the one who's going to tell you how to do it. It's a
yeah,
great recipe for disaster. So the first thing is to be able to build those relationships,
yeah.
understand the problem for each one's point of view. You will begin to discover, what are those little pieces, the problem that you're trying to solve, or whatever is your role supposed to be in the organization. What are the nuances of that role? A job description or something cannot ever, ever, ever tell you what you are supposed to do. It will only come up through conversations. It'll only come up through those kind of settings where you are able to discuss and discover all of this.
Hmm. So I think trying to understand who is the person behind trying to do the job, and not really just the expertise that is coming out, or not just really the outcomes that are coming out, seem like a good investment to make. It might not show immediate results, but I really like that point. Now, the thing about being compassionate is that it can sometimes go wrong, and that seems to be a question that seems to have been, being asked, which
Yeah.
is that I can have given consideration and I can have given leeway, and let's say two things can happen. One is that, how do I continue being compassionate when a person continues making mistakes?
I think the notion of compassionate um, needs to be sort of, clarified. That
Mm-hmm.
being compassionate does not mean being blind to errors, or sort of, lowering your
Mm,
standards. right away I said that, people who are really compassionate actually do better when it comes to performance because they are
Mm,
able to understand the person and understand what is it that the person will be able to do and will not be able to do. So,
mm,
just that simple act actually turns the person into something which is easy to manage and understand. So, I think that's the element I
mm,
want to sort of look at that. In this context, when a person is not delivering,
mm,
the person has to be equally tough. People are multidimensional, because you are compassionate doesn't mean you can't be firm about deliverables. You may be creative about trying to solve them in multiple ways, but doesn't mean that you'll give up on the deliverable. It
mm.
can't happen like that. So you can hold both. I think that so, which is why, if you remember, I said there are five,
Yes,
shifts that are happening.
polarities.
One of the shifts is how do you manage your polarities? These
Yes,
polarities of being firm and being compassionate.
that's right.
It's an and world. You have to be like you have to focus on the employee and the customer. You have to focus inside the
Mm,
organization and outside.
and
So the
outside.
polarities are always there. So I think
Yes.
that's how I would describe it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes giving tough feedback and not just being kind but also being demanding a response or accountability is an act of compassion.
Yeah, I mean, you owe your loyalty to the organization and the employee both.
That's
It's not either or, So
mm, mm, mm. And if I find myself, so for let's say I'm finding myself in the throes of that dilemma, I'm finding myself in that tension. Maybe consulting a few others, maybe reaching out to some others is a good thing for me to do than to feel that I should solve this by myself. Um,
yeah, I mean, a lot of solutions can be co-created, first of all, even with the person concerned.
great.
That's the first part of it. But over and above, I mean, we rarely function in that ecosystem. There'll be multiple people who would
Mm,
have solved similar problems. We said, and a lot of times, the problem that you're grappling with may sound extremely unique to you because you've never seen something like this before. But somebody has, and chances are that it's been seen multiple times. So,
mm,
when someone shares something like that, it's something truly unique. And I would say that, if you look at there are animals, let's say in Australia, like the wombat, is the first one that comes to my mind. I'd never heard of an animal called the wombat, and
mm,
I saw it there for the first time in Australia. But people there have seen lots of it. You may not
mm,
have. So for me, it was a unique scenario.
mm,
But everybody else was like extremely blasé about the whole thing because they'd seen it multiple times. So I think in any ecosystem, there are people who have seen that
mm,
situation, who have seen other instances, who've dealt with some of this stuff on their own, maybe in another organization. So there's always millions of solutions available. It's just that you haven't tapped into it. Um, it's really like saying, most of the questions that you are looking at, by and large, people have answered it somewhere or the other, which is how Google operates. It may be new to you. You are trying to figure that out, but enough people have solved that. When you're trying to fix a feature on your phone, it may be a hell of a challenge for you, and you're really grappling with it. But millions of people have done it, and if you go on to those videos, you'll find 7 million views, which means 7 million people have solved it before. I'm the last one in that queue. So yeah, human beings are extremely ingenuous.
So I hear you say that if we were to truly build compassionate workplaces, it is absolutely essential that there is adequate curiosity and humility. And there is this acceptance that somebody else has solved this problem before. I just need to simply ask. I really like the idea of solving the problem with the person.
Yeah.
So, how can I, not treat this person like bringing a pain point or a complaint to me? but let's be partners and let's solve this together. So I think compassionate places are places where I feel in charge of my problem and I can solve it. I'm going to bring up another question or a comment that is
Sure.
being made, which is that sometimes we find people are unable to show empathy in a challenging situation, and we find that for caregivers specifically. Let's say there is this person. So you spoke about a marriage, but let's say there is a person in the workplace that comes up with a child with a life limiting condition, or a parent who is living elsewhere. Um, and I'm a manager, so I haven't experienced empathy because I lived in a time when, chop chop, do the job, take your emotions home. Uh, so, how can I express empathy when I have not received or experienced it? Or what do you think about these situations? What has been your experience?
I think I have sort of always believed, and I've sort of repeatedly seen that. And the pandemic actually proved this all over again, at a global scale, something which I'd, never seen before. I mean, I think human beings are extremely creative. They can learn pretty much anything that they want to. And, look at it like this, that, the world had never seen, at least in this particular generation, you had not seen anything like this. And we had no idea whether this is going to last a week, 10 days, or, if you remember the early days of the pandemic where it was discussed, people were really speculating and saying that, if you ask us to be indoors for like 10 days or 2 weeks, isn't that a bit much? I mean, how do you expect people to not step out anywhere for 2 weeks? I mean, it's out of question. Guess what? I mean, for 2 years, people have done that. Are you going to tell me that school will not function? Are you going to tell me that the offices will not function? Yeah. And yet people found solutions. So the point I want to make is that, human beings, if you really want to see the resilience and the determination of human beings to overcome any kind of setting, um, I just urge you to look at the Paralympics. When you look at that, you begin to understand these are people who most of them have never chosen that particular condition that they are working with, and yet they have not only accepted it, they've embraced it and sort of tried to make the most of it and are now excelling and doing what they have to in their lives. So I think human beings are extremely resilient and they will learn, whatever needs to be done. Um, to the question that, what if somebody has not experienced it? Yes, it does take them longer. If I've not seen, let's say, if I've not driven a rocket, I may fumble with it and I may feel a little overwhelmed at times. But, human beings learn pretty much anything and everything. We are learning machines. So think about the fact that children are not born knowing how to talk, walk, go to school, or anything that we are doing for the rest of our lives. We've never born with that knowledge. We pick it up. The languages, and think about how much adults struggle when they are trying to learn a language, but kids pick up multiple languages on the fly and all of that. So human beings are extremely sort of creative creatures. So that always, I think of it as my greatest belief in people, that they will always find a way to solve the problem.
I really like your faith in humanity and human potential.
I'm a sucker for optimism. So,
It's endearing and it's hopeful. I really like the sound of it. That human potential works in amazing ways, right? Yeah,
completely,
both
completely.
sides of the spectrum.
Sure.
And I like the faith in it. I like the possibility of humanity and human potential. um, I'm going to take on one other question. As you have been someone who has worked with HR professionals and transformation of organizations, human potential, talent, and culture, what would you tell OD consultants, HR consultants, about bringing to light the power of compassionate workplaces?
Hmm. I, you know, people in the profession all have their own experiences and skills. So I'm not sure I have any extra knowledge that I can, share with them more than what they already know. I think when you're trying to drive change of any kind, if and as I said that we are going to live in a world where polarities will
Yes,
coexist. Yeah.
yes,
If you look at that as a design principle in some sense,
yes.
organizations and individuals, by and large, very rarely find the perfect balance. You kind of do something, if it works well, you do some more of it, and then you kind of overdo that entire piece. Then you swing to one extreme. You did something, it didn't work well, you go to the other extreme and stop doing it, and then suddenly, you're depriving yourself of that opportunity. Human beings are constantly in a state of trying to achieve that equilibrium that we are describing here between two polar opposites. So I think when people are looking at that, self-awareness, I think, is the first thing that helps people to understand what's my reaction to this, what is going on. I mean, so for example, um, when you find that there is a challenge which is happening in the workplace, what is my response to it? What am I feeling about it? What are my value systems? What is coming into conflict? What is making me uneasy? If you are able to understand that, chances are that now you are beginning to look at it from a human point of view rather than through a manual and say that, okay, people will not come late. I get it. But then what am I feeling when somebody comes in late for a meeting like this? That is a starting point. Most of the times when you're able to do that, I think it creates the opportunities for people to, if you understand yourself, I think you are a step ahead in trying to understand other people and because then you begin to understand, I'm feeling so upset with this whole response that I'm not able to have a conversation where I can listen to that person's view in an unbiased way. The moment you do that, you begin to become slightly better at listening. And those are ways in which, therefore, being grounded in what's happening with me and what that is doing, my reaction in turn is doing to the other people, is a powerful way in which this works.
So, what I hear is that if I were to, like you are emphasizing the significance of self awareness and bringing in a human centered approach to intervening when OD consultants are working with organizations, in saying that listen to yourself, articulate that. And that is the starting point for highlighting or the significance of compassion at the workplace. um, Caregiver Sathi is an organization that is invested in recognizing caregivers, not just in families, not just in societies, but most significantly in workplaces. And I'm going to latch on to that one statement that you made, that organizations are very powerful in creating social change.
Sure.
Yeah. And therefore, organizations may have hitherto not seen the caregiver role that many of us play. So even as whether it is as husbands, as wives, as colleagues, as daughters and sons, certainly we are all caregivers, and organizations need to start seeing this part of the employees' responsibilities. Um, What do you think HR and leaders need to do to recognize and support caregivers at the workplace in order to be
Um,
compassionate enough?
yeah, so I think, being able to, as I said, that when people start working with each other, one of the first things is to be able to build a relationship of trust. And part of it comes when the other person feels that there's a degree of psychological safety where I can talk about my personal challenges. So, for example, there's somebody who used to be in my team, um, who, as soon as I would very often joke that, you can make out what time it is, 6 o'clock, based on, if the person is not at the seat, in the this used to be, and I had said it probably for a couple of days until I kind of thought that I must find out what is the steering sense of urgency with which this person leaves the office every single day, where even holding back and lingering for 5 minutes to say goodbye to the colleagues, even if you didn't want to work late hours or something, that was not the expectation. But to be able to do that, and then when I sort of did sit down and have that conversation with her, I discovered that this person who's as a single mother who has to pick up the child from the creche because the creche shuts at 6:15 or whatever, um, and so I would actually, on a particular day, I just noticed her literally running from the office into, going into that particular creche to pick up the kid. And that suddenly changed the way that I looked at it. I said that, I mean, instead of leaving at 6, why don't you leave at 10 minutes to 6 so that you can, walk peacefully and get there? Because, you're so distracted. I would worry about you crossing the road, So why don't you leave 5, 10 minutes earlier? Because it's not like some huge task will be accomplished in 10 minutes. Um, and on the and what that does is, you would always notice that if there's a requirement for the person to complete a certain quantum of task, when you take away this whole norms of, you have to be here at this time and versus this time, if you take that away and you focus on the output, the person would sort of really, take that work home, complete it, and bring it the next day. So nothing was lost. But in my understanding that there is a certain uh, constraint with which this person is operating, this makes you a little more sensitive. So, I would say that instead of, initially we say that let's, do dinners together, as a team.
Yeah.
To change that, because you realize that it's very discriminatory against anyone who has to go back home and, uh, even if it's whatever, they may not be on every single day, but even on that particular day, somebody may have a challenge to not be able to join you for dinner. But if you sort of say that, on the time when you are having the meetings, which everybody is present for in those days, ordering in food and having that food together is a very simple way of exactly what you would have done at that point of time. But it just is more inclusive. So you can always figure out something which you can do to make sure everybody's there. Once people know that you are being flexed, you don't have to ask. People will, go out of the way to, reciprocate in every situation. And therefore, I don't think I've ever faced a situation where being compassionate meant being, comfortable and tolerating low standards. It's never happened like that. I mean, maybe I can think of just
Okay.
one example throughout my career, perhaps one or two. But no, it has never been that way.
So, thank you for busting that myth and giving us this beautiful example to bring this entire conversation to a meaningful close. Because what I hear you say is that in that incident, which I think is commonplace for many of us, where we have judged people, you're saying suspend the judgment, be curious, ask that colleague what's going on, and create a new solution. And I'm certain this particular person that you reached out to and gave that extra 10 minutes would have delivered great value to you over a long period
Yeah,
of time.
absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's just, and you said that don't judge. I mean, I did judge. That was the, trigger point. Because hey, what is this? I mean, what is this desperation that you need to be, like watching the clock? And so, it was all of that. Until you begin to discover that, as I said, when you discover the shadow of the other roles,
Yeah,
suddenly it opens up your world. And, this person also discovers the shadow of your roles.
yeah.
So I think that's what it is.
But you did let your curiosity weigh in a little more than judging. So we are
Yep,
holding the polarity of judging the person but being equally curious. Thank
absolutely.
you for that lesson. I am delighted with this conversation and the many practical experiences and the insights that you have brought for us today. I do think the future is in compassionate workplaces. It's not an oxymoron, it is something that we can strive to and build. Thank you for your time today, Abhijit. I do think there are many, many conversations that we would like to have with you and understand this better. But thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you so very much for having me. It's just very kind of you, and all the best for your work that you are doing. It's incredibly powerful, and congratulations on 3 years. So that's so lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. We will leave with a short film on Caregiver Sathi, but thank you very much for joining us. A caregiver is anyone who provides care, physical, mental, emotional, social, or financial care, especially to those who are ailing, aging, or have some life limitation. Primary caregivers may provide support in daily activities to the care receiver, but they are also concerned about all other aspects of care, other members, and the unpredictability of the future. The current pandemic has brought alive this experience for almost each one of us. We are all caregivers, or will soon be. At Caregiver Sathi, we honor, encourage, and help caregivers because they also need care, companions, and compassion in order to sustain themselves. Our goal at Caregiver Sathi is to help build an ecosystem of a community and pool of resources for caregivers, so that as caregivers we have easy access to support that can help us provide the best care and comfort to those we love. What started as a figment of an idea many years ago has now traveled a journey of 3 years as an organization. We are celebrating our third anniversary of connecting thousands of caregivers, understanding, appreciating, and supporting them so that they are seen for what they do and their voice is heard. We have reached through print and digital mediums with our articles, podcasts, webinars, and workshops, conversations with gentle warriors, compassionate caring, our educational series, humanizing our healers for our healthcare practitioners. There are more than 450 written articles and videos on our website and YouTube channel. We hope to help and guide caregivers so that anyone can easily navigate their journeys through access to information, support, and services. Until recently, caregivers were invisible in the workplaces with blurring boundaries of work and home. The caregiving aspect of employees has precipitated as a topical concern for most organizations. Organizations that believe in caring for the employees and are invested in the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion are recognizing that it is the caregiving burden that often compels women to fall off the workforce. It is also impacting men from nuclear families who are in the sandwich generation. We have worked with many leading organizations and hope that many others will join us in this journey. Well-being has emerged as a top concern for all of us around the world, and one of the ways of building emotional mastery and resilience is the practice of gratitude and connection through volunteering. We offer a wide range of volunteering opportunities that are age-appropriate and aligned to your skills and experience. We've had more than 100 volunteers, younger than 18 years and 1,500 volunteers from across the world, especially during the second wave that was devastating, and during that period we put together 10,000 plus rows of verified medical resources across 50 plus cities in India. 72 interns over the last 3 years have worked and walked with us. We are immensely grateful and thankful to our mentors and advisors who have provided us support and guidance, especially through the many moments of self-doubt and uncertainty. Our ambassadors that have worked relentlessly to help us open doors, create opportunities, and provide their valuable inputs. We have created many resources that leaders, organizations, and individuals can use in the form of handbooks, support groups, and learning programs. Over the last few decades, we have built our capacities in many areas: academics, technology, professional capacities. But one life skill that we assume we will have is caregiving. Being a caregiver is not something that anyone is born with. It is a role we step into, and there are skills and competencies we need to build, and we cannot afford to learn by hit and trial. If we are going to be in this role one way or the other, we may as well learn to be one, to join a community through which we can learn, share our experience, participate in the journeys of others, and encourage others to join and benefit from the community. After all, we are all caregivers.